Hello. So I'm so grateful to be here today, and I'm really excited to chat with you all about this topic. It's something that is near and dear to my heart and is what I've focused on throughout my graduate training. So just to introduce myself, I am currently at Suffolk University. I'm a clinical psychology doctoral candidate. I'm finishing up in this last year. And previously, I was at the University of Pennsylvania, where I got a master's degree in mental health counseling, and I've gotten my master's in clinical psychology at Suffolk. I've worked a lot with children, particularly in therapeutic settings. So I've worked in a school-based therapeutics services program. I've worked in a community mental health trauma center. I did assessment and cognitive testing at Mass General Hospital. And this past year, I was actually at Hasbro Children's Hospital in Rhode Island, where I was doing several clinical rotations. Within the hospital setting. And so I've loved working with children. I've loved having these conversations with children and parents, and I'm really excited to talk with you all about this today. So the reason that I think this is so important and what we'll get into throughout the presentation is that it's so critical to be exposing children to these conversations early on in their life, and thinking about culture and diversity and differences. There are ways in which our kids are unique, and there are ways in which the kids around them are unique. And I think being able to speak to and celebrate those differences is one of the most important things that we can do. So I'm also grateful the library has put together a wonderful book list and resources. And I also can always share mental health resources at the end, but that will be shared with you to tie everything together. So about me, today I'm going to be talking about different identities. So I wanted to share some of my identities with you. So you already know my name, McKenna. You can just refer to me as McKenna. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And the reason I think it's important to talk about pronouns, especially, and to list pronouns, you can see they're listed with my name, is that there are so many different ways of identifying, especially with gender. And typically we only see gender norms of male and female. And so if I share my pronouns as a regular thing, it's normalizing the experience of sharing pronouns for people who may hold marginalized identities. So if I can share my pronouns, someone might be tipped off that they can share their pronouns with me and feel comfortable doing that, maybe if they don't identify with typical male or female pronouns. So that's why I emphasize doing that so much. My gender, so I'm a cisgender female. Cisgender just means I identify with the sex that I was born with. So I was born as a female and I identify as a female. My sexual orientation is straight. My race is white. My ethnicity is Ashkenazi Jew. So Ashkenazi just means I'm an Eastern European Jew, and Judaism can be both an ethnicity and a religion. So I identify with Judaism as my religion as well. So I've shared with you kind of my professional identities, and then I also hold all of these identities personally. And then if you think about it, there are so many more. I have an identity as a friend and a daughter and a sister. And so when we think about aspects of diversity, I want to really keep in mind that there are so many pieces to diversity, and language around identity is so important. And just thinking we may all look the same, or we may all be the same on the inside, but showing kids and understanding ourselves that there are nuances in identity is critical. So before we jump into how we talk about these issues, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of definitions. So culture, I think culture is a really big word. We talk about culture all the time, but I think so often the way that people think about culture is maybe just race and ethnicity. So I want to kind of expand that idea. So culture is just a way of life of a group of people, the behavior, beliefs, values, and symbols that they accept, generally without thinking about them, and that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. So a nice example of this idea of culture are gender norms, as I was talking about before. We all, have this idea from when we were really young, especially I think like my generation and older, maybe kids now are getting exposed to things differently, but I I grew up knowing girls wear pink and boys wear blue, and I would play with dolls and my brother would play with trucks. And there are all these ways that I was socialized to engage with my experience of gender. Um, and so I think that that's this idea of these behaviors and values that I was just accepting without thinking about it, that were passed down to me. And one of the most important things, number one, I think that we've seen, especially with gender, but across many things, is that the norms that we have in our culture, in the United States culture, are not necessarily the norms that maybe we should have, and also are not necessarily the norms of other cultures. I think more and more kids are being exposed to getting to play with any toy that they want, or getting to have any color, or boys, it's okay if they are wearing dresses, and girls, it's okay if they want to play sports, and it's also okay if they don't identify as a boy or a girl. I think expressing all of those things to kids is happening now and is critical. But our society has a long way to go in terms of shifting our cultural views around that and what we express. And I also think, just thinking about other cultures I worked with in the mental health field, I see a lot of conversations around schizophrenia or psychosis. And so in the context of um, the United States, those are seen as mental health challenges. In other cultures, those are seen as beautiful gifts that especially religious leaders hold, and that they're not burdens, but that those people are prophets, or they can connect to some spiritual other. And so I think if you think about it, the same presentation of behavior is just viewed depending on where we're growing up. That's a point I really want to emphasize for you, and want you to think about when you're conveying messages to children. So all of this is really in the sense of creating spaces to make others feel comfortable. Because the way that I perceive the world, or my lens of the world, is going to be different than someone else's. And that doesn't mean that mine or theirs is right or wrong. It's just different. So I actually kind of sought out some responses of kids to see what they thought about culture. And there was a really nice site that I found that had some responses from middle school students for how they were defining culture in the last few years. So one response was, what we study and what we as people leave behind, love belonging to something, a community, life and children, and how we treat children in our communities. I think that's just so beautiful, because I think all of this is about community and belonging to something. And I think how we're expressing culture and experiencing culture and sharing it with our children can really shape the way that our world moves forward, and can really shape how our kids engage with the world as well. So that piece of it's learned through communication and imitation. I tried to model throughout this presentation ways to talk about identity, culture, and language. And I also think that what you'll want to do with kids is be modeling this behavior, and so that they're imitating it. As we know, kids imitate behaviors all the time. When they're little, they copy what we say. When they're older, some teens want to copy the cool kids, and so that imitation is really natural for children. So we want to be showing them things that are positive to imitate. So cultural humility is another piece. It's kind of in maybe complementing cultural competence, and maybe some of you have heard of cultural competence and maybe you haven't. But cultural competence is this idea that if we expose ourselves to certain things about culture enough, that we'll have this level of competence or understanding, and that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. And I always like to say that I can never achieve cultural competence. I will never know everything about every culture or experience. I can only continue to learn and grow. So that's why I like cultural humility. So for the definition, it's consistent commitment to learning, reflection, exploring power dynamics, understanding one's role in society. It's an alternative to cultural competence. And presenting this to an audience through a library, and especially I know some of you are teachers, and just having children of your own, I think we're all engaging in processes of learning and reflection, and I think those are things that most people value. And so kind of adding to that in the context of exploring culture is this idea of there are certain power dynamics that we uphold. I can think about that right now. Some of the power dynamics I hold are being a white person, holding so many academic degrees. So I've had access to education. My socioeconomic background, I come from an upper middle class background. So those are all things that I think about when especially when I'm engaging with patients, but also when I'm conveying messages to others or engaging with others, because I know the power that I hold and the role that I play. And even being a therapist, I hold some level of power in that context. And so just being mindful of that, and then knowing that I need to step outside of myself and expose myself to other cultures to try and understand them. I think having that emphasis for yourself is something that children will want to imitate and model if they see you doing that as well. So in practice, what could this look like? Explore your own culture with your children. We all come from different backgrounds. Like I was saying, I'm Eastern European Jew. Purim is tomorrow. Purim is a holiday that we celebrate. And so every year when I was growing up, my parents would tell me the story, and then we would eat hamantashen, which are special cookies for Purim. And we would dress up in costumes and we would have fun. And so I got to experience my culture often on holidays. But one thing that I wish my parents had done more of was talking with me about culture in other ways, or just more normal conversations at the dinner table. So I would say explore that with your children, consider your own strengths, your own biases, and discuss them and share as a family. I have one friend who has two little boys. I think they're now 5 and 8. And one activity she's been doing during COVID is setting up different parts of her house as different countries and having little foods that are associated with them, or flags or toys, and having her boys go around the house and just experience culture that way, and then talking about it. What was their favorite thing? How was it different from what they grew up doing? And they love it. That they always ask, "Can we travel again?" That's what she calls traveling, because no, we can't travel during COVID right now. And it's beautiful, and it's a great way to expose them. And she does it, I think, about once a month, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. She can just go to the store and like buy certain foods, or she can find little trinkets online, and or she has friends that sometimes will donate things. Her friends have different cultural backgrounds, so that's something to do. I remember when I was younger, just thinking about being exposed to differences. I was friends with a girl who had a disability, and she was in a wheelchair, and it was called osteogenesis imperfecta. So she was growing up where her bones were really brittle and she wouldn't grow past a certain size. And I remember I would go to her house and we would play Barbies, and I would always have to do what she wanted. She was just a little like rigid and flexible in her play. And so I would go home to my mom and I would say, "Why can't I decide the storyline for the Barbies?" And my mom said to me, "You get to decide so many other things, and you have so many other things that you get to do. And this is something that she really enjoys, and she doesn't get to do all the other things that you get to." So this is, she was kind of explaining to me that we had these differences, and that so many things are going my way, and that it was really important to engage and play with her. And I was a very compliant child, so I did that. But I kind of wish that my mom had talked with me a little bit more about what were our differences, and had me reflect on that, and had pushed it a bit further. I think that this piece of learning and exploring understanding is so critical too, because sometimes people want to say we live in a colorblind society, and I always say that's not good. We don't want to say everyone is the same. We want to teach kids to embrace differences. So that's why cultural humility is so important. And then diversity. So the concept of diversity encompasses acceptance and respect. It means understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. It's the exploration of these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. And it's about understanding each other and moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual. So we often have kids kind of show off their talents, right? We'll do talent shows. We like to tell our kids that they're unique and emphasize the uniqueness of them. And so I love that. And I think that's exactly what we want to be doing with diversity, is emphasizing differences, celebrating differences. So again, there are some high school students here actually that responded to what does diversity mean to them. And so one student said differences among groups of people and individuals based on ethnicity, race, socioeconomic status, gender, exceptionalities, language, religion, sexual orientation, and geographical areas. Another student said people with different opinions, backgrounds, degrees, and social experiences, religious beliefs, political beliefs, sexual orientation, heritage, and life experiences. And finally, a student said heterogeneity brings about opportunities to share, learn, and grow from the journeys of others. Without it, limitations arise and knowledge is gained in the absence of understanding. I think that is beautiful. I think we don't want our children to gain knowledge in the absence of understanding. If we never expose children to things, they're just going to make assumptions on their own with lack of understanding, and that's a problem. If I was never exposed to a child with a disability as I was when I was younger, then I would just have assumed that those kids like can't do certain things. This student she was in a normal classroom with me, and if I had never seen that before, maybe I would have had these assumptions. So diversity is more than just acknowledging these differences. It's conscious and involves appreciating and understanding these differences, practicing respect, and learning. So I really like this graphic because we talk a lot about I've talked a lot about diversity and power. And I think one of the other critical things to kind of recognize is that we're not all on the same level. I, as a white person, have many privileges that are different from people who identify as Black, Indigenous, Latinx, other people of color. Whereas I, as a Jewish person, don't hold the same privileges that people who practice Christianity do. So there are all these differences in terms of access and power, privilege, and resources. And so in reality, this first graph is really nice to show or picture that there are people that exist at different levels. Now, equality is giving everyone the same tools, right? So you can see here, everyone has the same size box. But even with the same tools, not everyone still has the same access to watching this baseball game because one person is much shorter, one person is just barely seeing over, and then the other person is already tall. So they already have the privilege of being tall. Now, equity is saying, okay, so everyone can have equal access to seeing the baseball game. We just have to give each person the individual tool that they need. Now, the thing about that is we don't always have the tools to give everyone what they need. And not everyone knows how to use these tools even when given them, or not everyone can access these tools even when they're available. So the best thing that we can do is work towards liberation or justice and kind of remove the barrier so that everyone has access. And that's a message that I think you can use this graphic with children and kind of show them these are differences in power. This is what I mean by it. And they'll kind of, this is a simple way of showing it, but they'll catch on over time and we'll see it in society. So now when we think about diversity and socio-emotional development, cultural contexts are influencing socio-emotional development. Cultural norms that I was talking about before are guiding how we engage with other people, how we interpret and evaluate social behaviors, and make meaning of experiences. And so children also learn how to express emotions differently based on the models of emotional expression they observe. So in some cultures, it's normal to express when you're sad, and it's really normalized to seek help and seek support. And in other cultures, it's not. And so it's not that we should change approach to emotional expression if someone comes from a family where that's not the norm. It's that we have to change the approach that we're taking with kids, especially in the classroom, or if we have other children who come over, or if our kids are seeing modeled in school ways of emotional expression that are different from what's happening at home. We just need to have open conversations about these things. I think that's so important. I sometimes see there's a disorder called conversion disorder, and it's literally a manifestation of not emotionally expressing, where kids bottle things up so much inside that then physically sometimes they become paralyzed, which is just this amazing and sad expression of the mind-body connection. But that's oftentimes those kids are not seeing emotional expression models in their parents, and then they don't know what to do with all of their feelings. And so I think really considering that people coming from different backgrounds, and so even I think I'm from California originally, and then I moved out to the East Coast. People in California are much friendlier. So there's literally a different culture between California and Boston and how people engage with each other. And so just, keeping that in mind when you're talking with your kids about diversity, and when you're talking with them about feelings that are coming up or things that they're seeing. Um, and then the other thing to keep in mind is that differences make it more difficult for people to connect with and have empathy for others. If I meet someone who looks like me and has the same background as me, it's much easier for me at baseline to understand them. But if I meet someone who's from a different country or from different practices, foundationally, there's already a difference there that we have to overcome. It's not that I can't have empathy for them, it's that I need to make the effort. And so the best way to overcome potential challenges in lack of empathy and not connecting is exposure to differences. I'm better able to understand other people if I've been exposed to their experiences. And so that's why having these conversations with kids early on is so critical. So just to give you, this is the kind of theoretical model that I base my therapy on, that I think about when I'm talking about culture and understanding differences in these conversations with kids. And so it's called Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Maybe some of you have heard of it, maybe not. But it's basically this idea, it looks a little complicated, but that the child is in the center, and then all of these systems are influencing them in their world. So we have, I don't need to talk about the system specifically, but you can see that there's this little child labeled individual in the middle. They're surrounded by their immediate family and their neighborhood play area and maybe school or childcare center. And then there's this like larger bubble where kids are also influenced by extended family. They're influenced by their parents' workplace. So if you as a parent are asked to stay late many nights and you're not getting to cuddle and put your kid to bed, that is indirectly, the workplace is indirectly influencing your relationship with your child. Friends and neighbors, if your kid is seeing that you're able to rely on a neighbor when something gets tough, that's being modeled to them, that there's community to support them. And then also there's this even broader bubble of this macro system. So values of where we're living right now is the United States, maybe Rhode Island, living there. I live in Massachusetts, and certain laws. And so, some policy influences child education. If you think about the No Child Left Behind, or if you think about larger society that's influencing what kids are exposed to in their school curriculum or what books are available at the library, all of those things are influencing our children. And there's this, I like to say, ecology of inequality. So certain kids will have access to certain things, and certain laws will impact children differently, and certain neighborhoods will be more loving and welcoming. And so thinking about all of these different systems that are influencing our kids beyond just our connection with them and maybe their friends and teachers. So helping kids understand diversity in all forms, I just have this little list here of gender, race, indigenous heritage, neurodiversity, so just how we learn and think differently, ability status, religion and spirituality, appearance, family structure. These are all dimensions of diversity that I would encourage you to talk with kids about. And here, this is an activity that I think is really wonderful that you can do that facilitates recognition and understanding of these complexities across multiple dimensions of identity. So this is called the addressing framework. It's Pamela Hayes who came up with it. And I think that these are all dimensions of diversity, some questions that you can go through. Some, if your kids are a bit younger, some of these questions developmentally might not be appropriate. Or you can answer these questions and model it for your kids. So when were you born? And how have your values or worldview been shaped by your generation? That's something that you can talk about and they can see you modeling. And so I think that another way to do this is bringing in books. So you can pick age and then have you and your child read a book that's about a child connecting with an older adult. And then you can have a conversation about age. Well, why was it hard for the child to maybe connect with this older adult at the time, and what made it easier? And you can have your child kind of reflect on the older adults that they're connected to, like grandparents or other people in the community that may have maybe seen. And so you can find books that talk about each dimension of this framework. And you can do an exercise where, like, once a week or once a month, you pick one and you read about it, and then you talk about it in the context of you, yourself, and your child. I think that's a really wonderful idea. And then cultural mapping. So just to show you what that looks like on the next slide, for each piece that you talk about. So if you pick a book and we're to talk about age, you could draw your child at the center and create this map. And then for that day that you talk about age, have your child kind of draw a line and then write their, you can help them write their identity, and then they can talk about what it's like to be younger. And kids are already thinking about those things. I remember thinking when I was younger that I wanted to be, when I was 6 I wanted to be 16, and then when I was 16 I wanted to be 21, and it just goes on. And so kids know, and they're thinking about these things. But so mine is boring. I just have my name in the center, and then all of these lines that talk about my identity. But your kid can color and draw, and you can make it more creative and exciting, and that's a good activity to do. And just a note on Indigenous heritage. So I don't have Indigenous heritage within the United States, but one thing you can do for that, if your family is not from a Native American background, is you can actually go to this website that's listed down here, and look at the land that you're on, the native land that you're on. And then you can talk with your kids about the tribe that was first on that land and what it means to honor that land. And so that's just one way, even if that isn't part of your identity, that you can be exploring identities of other people. So now just to get how to talk with your children about diversity. So just thinking like children of color or children with disabilities or children who hold diverse identities, they're disproportionately exposed to conversations about identity and diversity because of their daily life experiences. So parents, especially, I would say, like as a white person with the white children that I work with, and when these conversations come up, I want to actively be bringing up these conversations so I can help them establish language and understanding around these differences in terms of race and gender and ability status and all of those things. So I appreciate this metaphor of talking to kids about diversity the same way you would talk about safety. So when we teach kids about safety, we show them what's safe and what's not safe. We ask them to repeat those behaviors back to us. We ask them to demonstrate and show safe behaviors. So it doesn't matter how you're getting the point across or if it feels like a lot, because safety is a priority. I would say diversity is the same. If you fail to acknowledge differences, then you're not preparing your children for living in a diverse world. And you're doing them a disservice because they won't know how to navigate these conversations and differences. And in turn, they can end up hurting people later on. So I would just think about that. I'd like to say like riding a bike without a helmet, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, but you would never let your kid go out to ride a bike without a helmet. And I would say we don't want to let our kids go out into the world without understanding and acknowledging diversity. So encourage discussions and capitalize on teachable moments. In the short term, you want your kids to have a basic understanding of diversity, but eventually you want them to learn inclusive behaviors and language. And ultimately, you want them to use these inclusive practices and advocate for other people whose differences maybe aren't as privileged. So I would say any teachable moments, if a child asks about why someone looks different or why they do different things, use that as a time to open up a conversation. Kids are asking these things and are curious all the time. Say intentionally seek out books to read or shows to watch that show differences and have discussions after. Ask your child what they noticed. Did they connect to the book or show them in some way, and why or why not? I would say don't like whisper about differences, right? Like, it's not a shameful thing to talk about race or racism or ability status or ableism. Like, it's important to have these conversations. So again, modeling for your kids that you want to have them, and that you want them to be open to saying kind of what they see, and then also holding accountability, which I'll get into, but holding yourself accountable and holding your child accountable. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to not know the language, and that's why we're all practicing cultural humility and learning. So and again, so here, holding accountability, as I was saying before. I like the bike metaphor. If you saw your child go outside without a helmet on to ride a bike, you would point it out, you would say something, and you wouldn't let them do that. I would say the same thing goes for behaviors around diversity. If you see your child not treating someone else fairly, speak up and help them learn. Making mistakes is okay. We're just here to help our kids learn. So avoid labeling. This is another one. it doesn't fully capture complex experiences. So labeling a child as and this kind of goes together, model using inclusive and respectful language and behavior. So you might make a mistake and you can show your child how to kind of learn from that. But I think about this in the mental health field. Instead of calling someone's child an autistic kid, I say, a child has autism or is on the autism spectrum. Because it's not labeling them as X type of child. It's saying I'm a child with this difference. And there's just a little bit of nuance and more acceptance in the latter language. And if you accidentally say it the first way, then you can say aloud, like especially in front of your kid, oops, I meant to say this, and explain why it's important to say it differently. I mess up all the time and I'm still learning. And so I think that's really important to think about. And then taking a strengths-based lens. So emphasizing strengths and others' differences rather than talking about deficits. So talk about resilience, talk about how kids who have differences, um, have to navigate the world, and how that's beautiful that they're learning how to navigate the world in these other ways, that it's beautiful that people have different holidays and foods that they enjoy and multiple languages that they speak. So really highlighting strengths in these conversations. And then finally, encouraging support and support seeking and emotional expression. So I would say sometimes kids will have questions and won't know how to ask. And so you just want to name for kids that everyone needs help sometimes, that you need help sometimes, and that it's okay if they feel confused or they're, might say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and that we're all learning together. So emphasizing help seeking as a strength and responding when your child asks for help. It's so critical to model and reinforce the help seeking behavior, and then not minimizing emotions, beliefs, or situations. So if your child sees something happen that they don't think is okay, if they see someone being treated unfairly and it's upsetting them, talk about it with them. Or if they feel like maybe they were treated unfairly, help kids, I guess, manage emotions by validating their emotions and providing a safe space or environment to express emotions. I think so often we go into this mode of everything's going to be okay, or you don't have to cry, or it's not a big deal. And that I understand is coming from a place of wanting to decrease distress and make your child feel better. But sometimes it's just good to hold space that there are sad emotions that we can feel, or there are confusing things that are happening in the world, or there are things that we don't understand, and that it's good to share that, especially with an adult that they love and trust. And then this will also teach your kids to validate other children's experiences, which at the end of the day, I think is what we all want to be doing. We want our own emotions to be validated, and we also want to make others feel comfortable and validated.